Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Good Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. For my part, it's good to be back after a month of pre-recorded episodes. So much has happened since the last time I sat down in front of the camera and put together an episode. How about my guests, though? Mrs. Tiffany Boyd and Mr. Jamie Miller were fantastic and gracious with their time. I'm saddened to report that the FREE Act did not pass and it failed in the subcommittee here in Tennessee General Assembly. And the stated reasons for its failure is often trotted out as a lie used by the enemies of freedom and liberty. And the trans publicans in our General Assembly can count themselves in that group. We'll discuss that piece of legislation a bit more later in the program, and more specifically the so-called Republicans that killed it, as well as the perpetuators of a myth that is spread only to keep children trapped in failing government schools, because that is all about the money. Also, as a bit of a personal update, I want to let you all know that I learned about some new terminology and how it relates to my rescheduled knee surgery. The term is malignant hyperthermia, not hypo, but hyper. Anyway, malignant hyperthermia is a type of severe reaction that occurs in response to medications used during general anesthesia among those who are susceptible. Symptoms include muscle rigidity, fever, and a fast heart rate. Complications can include muscle breakdown and high blood potassium. Most people who are susceptible are generally unaffected when not exposed to triggering agents. Malignant hyperthermia is a disorder that can be considered a gene-environment interaction. In most people with this susceptibility, they have few or no symptoms unless they are exposed to a triggering agent. The most common triggering agents are anesthetic gases that are used primarily in general anesthesia or anesthesia drugs. In other words, it is a condition that can have very severe, including death, reactions to patients under general anesthesia during surgery. Now, this hasn't happened to me during my past surgeries. In fact, I was joking with my bride the day before the surgery was scheduled that with this impending knee surgery, I had already had more surgeries in the little less than 8 years that I've been retired from the Navy than during my entire 30 years on active duty. But since both of my brothers experienced malignant hyperthermia during some of their recent surgeries, I informed the surgeon and the anesthesiologist about that, and they immediately canceled the surgery. It was going to be performed in an outpatient surgery center that was not equipped to handle such an emergency. Now, if you're keeping count, that is strike 2 for trying to get this knee repaired. I'm not going to go for strike 3, so when I got back to the house, I called the orthopedic center treating me and told them that I was going to forego surgery until such time as the knee completely goes out on me. I also let my primary care physician at the VA know that I would like to be tested to see if I'm susceptible to malignant hyperthermia. They could do genetic testing through blood work or do a muscle fiber biopsy and expose that tissue to the anesthesia drugs to see if the sample reacts negatively. Of course, I would prefer the blood test and not the biopsy. So that is where I am at with the knee surgery, postponed indefinitely. There was a bonus out of that situation, though. My mother drove up to my house a couple of days before the surgery because she wanted to be here for the start of my recovery. Ever the mom and ever the nurse. So it was a great few days with my mom at my house before her and her puppy Baxter made their way back to North Carolina. That's enough of an update about me, though, folks. In this week's show, I asked the question, is the Sevier County GOP going to do it again? And it being ensuring that only a select few hold leadership positions in the county executive committee. We'll explore that and some of the information I've shared on my blog over the past few weeks about this situation before tomorrow's biennial reorganization meeting down at the Sevier County Courthouse. So let's take a stand in the arena again this week, folks, and get on with the show.
Welcome to Liberty Leadership and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
Well, folks, like I mentioned in the opening, it's great to be back with you once again after a month of pre-recorded shows. I would like to thank my guests, Caden McElwain, Tiffany Boyd, and Jamie Miller, for taking time out of their schedules to share some time with my audience. Speaking of Tiffany and her organization, Free Your Children, we have some sad but very predictable news to report. The FREE Act, it failed in a subcommittee of the Tennessee General Assembly, specifically the House Education Administration Subcommittee. And I'll provide you the names of those representatives and how they voted in just a bit. Well, they killed the bill on the 11th of March. In case you did not watch the interview with Tiffany, here is some background on the FREE Act. That bill would have prohibited the state or a local government or agency in this state from imposing any rules, requirements, mandates, or guidelines regarding the curriculum, instructional materials, or educational methods used by parents or legal guardians for children being educated in a homeschool. In other words, it codifies parents' God-given rights to educate their children free from government interference. Present law here in Tennessee requires that every parent, guardian, or other legal custodian residing here having control or charge of any child or children between 6 and 17 to cause the child or children to attend public or non-public school, and in the event of failure to do so, are subject to penalties. Compulsory attendance, in other words. A parent, guardian, or other legal custodian who commits educational neglect, keep that in mind, or makes a false statement concerning the age of the child or the time that the child has attended, they commit a Class C misdemeanor, which is punishable by up to 30 days in prison, a fine not to exceed $50, or both. Each day's unlawful absence constituted separate offenses. Now, this bill would have provided that the student's parents or legal guardians that have opted out are exempt from the Tennessee's compulsory school attendance, or truancy intervention, and all other educational laws, rules, and requirements established by the state or by a local government or agency in the state. The FREE Act would have also prohibited the state or a local government or agency in this state from requiring a student being educated in such a homeschool or the student's parent or legal guardian to be administered or to administer any assessment, including, but not limited to, a state-mandated standardized test or assessment. Because we see how well that's been working not only here in Tennessee, but all over the Republic as well. It would also not require parents or legal guardians to submit or report any information or documentation regarding the homeschool student's attendance or education to the state or any school or school district in the state or any other government agency. Now, as it relates to child labor laws, present law regulates employment of minors, providing several exemptions, including minors who are 16 or 17 and not enrolled in school. However, an employer that employs a minor who is 16 or 17 must have on file a written statement signed by the director of schools stating that the particular minor is not enrolled in school or is lawfully excused from compulsory school attendance. A director of schools with respect to a homeschool means the director of the local education agency where the child who has been registered as a homeschool child would otherwise attend. A little bit government control there. The FREE Act would have added that with respect to a homeschool that opts out of state regulation, the director of schools for such a school would be the homeschooling parent or legal guardian. So in layman's terms, all that means is It codifies parental rights and limited government control. Something more on this in a bit as it relates to some so-called libertarian radio talk show host and his verbal altercation with a homeschool parent that happened last week. Now, present law prohibits an employer from employing a minor during school hours, but it exempts students enrolled in homeschools or church-related schools if the student has consent of the parent conducting the homeschool. However, the student must present to the employer a letter signed by the director of schools confirming the student's enrollment and authorization to work. The director of a church-related school must send a copy of the letter to the director of the local education agency, the superintendent of the school district in which the child resides. This bill would have revised this provision to not require the parent or legal guardian of a student who's being educated in a homeschool pursuant to the Free Act have to provide any documentation or information to or obtain any consent or authorization from the superintendent of schools in the district they live. And further, as it relates to driver's licenses, present law generally requires that the Department of Safety deny a license or instruction permit for the operation of a motor vehicle to a person under 18 who does not at the time of application present any of the following documentation. One, a diploma or other certificate of graduation from a secondary high school. Two, proof of enrollment in a course leading to a high school equivalency credential approved by the State Board of Education from a state-approved institution or organization, or has obtained a high school equivalency credential approved by the State Board of Education. Three, proof of enrollment in a secondary school of the state or any other state. Or four, proof of being excused from such requirement due to circumstances beyond the applicant's control. All of that sounds like a whole lot of government control. Well, the Free Act would have deleted that provision. Additionally, present law requires the attendance teacher or director of schools to provide documentation of enrollment status on a form approved by the Department of Education for any student who is 15 or older upon request, who is properly enrolled in a school under the jurisdiction of the official for presentation to the Department of Safety on application for or reinstatement of an instruction permit or license. So, whenever a student who is 15 or older withdraws from school, except if it's beyond the control of the student, the attendance teacher or director of schools must notify the Department of Safety of such withdrawal. Within 5 days of receipt of the notice, the department must send notice to the licensee that the license will be suspended on the 30th day following the date the notice was sent, unless documentation of compliance with this law is received. Now, after having withdrawn from school for the first time, a student may not be considered as being in compliance until the student returns to school or turns 18. For second or subsequent withdrawals, the student must have all driving privileges suspended until the student turns 18. Again, the Free Act would have deleted that provision. In continuing, the present law further provides that after withdrawal, if the student's failure to enroll in a course leading to a high school equivalency credential approved by the State Board of Education or high school diploma is beyond the control of the student, or is for the purpose of transfer to another school as confirmed in writing by the student's parent or guardian, no notice must be sent to the department to suspend the student's motor vehicle driver license. If the student is applying for a license, the attendance teacher or the superintendent of schools must provide the student with documentation to present to the Department of Safety to excuse the student from the requirements. The school district superintendent or the appropriate school official of any private secondary school, with the assistance of the attendance teacher and any other staff or school personnel, is the sole judge of whether withdrawal is due to circumstances beyond the control of the student. Now, this provision would have been deleted as well. By September 1st of each year, present law requires the Department of Safety to report to legislative committees the number of students whose driver's licenses were suspended during the school year immediately preceding the report date. The Department of Safety must also report the number of students whose licenses were reinstated during such school year after such students had their licenses suspended and the total number of licenses granted to students during the school year. This bill deletes this provision and would have provided a bit of streamlining and efficiency to this way the government operates. But hey, we can't have that now, can we? Yes, even in a Republican supermajority controlled state government, control and reporting is necessary for every facet of our lives. Currently, present law requires every application for a driver's license, instruction permit, intermediate driver's license, and photo identification card must be made upon a form furnished by the Department of Safety. Each application requires certain information be provided by applicants. For applicants under 18, the application must be accompanied by documentation of compliance with school attendance requirements. No first-time applicant who's 18 or younger, whose license or learner's permit was suspended by withdrawing either voluntarily or involuntarily from a secondary school, those may be assessed a reinstatement fee of $20 by the department. It's another money-making scheme by the government. This bill, the FREE Act, would have deleted this provision and instead prohibits the Department of Safety from assessing a first-time applicant a reinstatement fee. In Tennessee, right now, present law provides procedures for the issuance and restoration of a license of a minor withdrawn from secondary school, including administrative review of license revocation, revocation hearings, and judicial review of the license revocation. This bill deleted all of that provision. The FREE Act would have prohibited the Department of Safety from conditioning the issuance of a driver's license or learner's permit on a school-age applicant's attendance record or enrollment status, or otherwise require a school-age applicant to present evidence of school attendance or enrollment as part of their application. All in all, the FREE Act was about freedom. And in a Republican supermajority General Assembly, you would think it would be a slam dunk, right? Well, that is the lie we are forced to live with here in Tennessee. Okay, I'll pick this up on the other side of the break and talk about a kerfuffle that happened on a right-leaning radio talk show after the bill failed. Keep in mind, folks, that while Tennessee is definitely not a blue state, it isn't a red state. It's a green state. It's all about the money and the procedures and the administratia that so controls government. So stick with me. I'll be right back. Okay, folks, the FREE Act, a bill that would have recognized God-given rights of parents to educate their children free from government control and administrative requirements, failed in the Republican supermajority General Assembly. While that fact alone should stand as a stark reminder that our government hates us, there is more to this than meets the eye. As I promised you earlier, here are the names of the representatives that serve on the House Education Administration Subcommittee. The chair is Representative William Slater, a Republican out of Gallatin. The other committee members are Scott Sipicki, a Republican out of Kulaoka, Chris Hurt, a Republican out of Halls, Jay Reedy, a Republican out of Aaron, Mark White, a Republican out of Memphis, and finally, Ronnie Glenn, a Democrat out of Clarksville. You want to know what's strange? All of those Republicans I just named, they voted to kill the bill. And the lone Democrat voted in favor of a bill that had to do with God-given rights and freedom. Imagine that. Talk about bizarro world. You can find all of their contact information on the General Assembly's website. If you feel so inclined to reach out to these trans-publicans and let them know how displeased you are, please do so. But don't, under any circumstances, use their email addresses to sign up for any special internet offers. That would be wrong. Anyway, after the bill failed, a homeschool parent called into a Nashville radio talk show to talk about it. The caller was none other than Brandon Lewis, the founder and editor of Tennessee Conservative News, the only conservative news outlet in the volunteer state. The host of the talk show is a guy named Matt Murphy. After reading about the exchange, I decided to check Mr. Murphy out. He has a lot of right-leaning posts and reposts on social media. I then used Grok to give me a breakdown of his political philosophy. This is what it came up with. Quote, Matt Murphy, a radio talk show host on Super Talk 99.7 WTN in Nashville, is known for espousing a political philosophy that aligns with conservative and, get this, libertarian principles. Though his exact stance can appear nuanced based on his on air discussions and career trajectory, his show is characterized by a blend of political commentary and opinionated takes, often appealing to a conservative audience while maintaining a sharp independent edge. Murphy has been described as a self proclaimed libertarian in some contexts, particularly in posts on X, suggesting, now it's only suggesting, he values individual liberty and limited government intervention. However, his rhetoric also resonates with traditional conservative themes, such as skepticism of political elites, a focus on local and state issues, and a willingness to challenge powerful figures directly. Unquote. Now, on Friday, March 14th, Mr. Lewis called into the Matt Murphy show to advocate for parental rights and explain his support for the FREE Act. As we already discussed, this bill died in subcommittee primarily over activist judges' concerns parents would, quote unquote, abuse their children without any state oversight, which I hope to get into that aspect if there's time this week. Anyway, Brandon made the obvious conservative and libertarian point that parents had a God-given right to educate their children without state government interference. Now, here's where we encounter some more bizarro world. The self-described libertarian, Mr. Matt Murphy, well, he insisted that less freedom for parents and more control from the government was best in this situation. Mr. Lewis, Brandon, stalwart conservative, he then recounted the abysmal state of government education, not only in academics, but also in morals and the use or waste of taxpayer money that goes along with government education. This provided a solid point that government control had not and will not make the situation any better. Add to that the academic and abuse statistics that Brandon relayed to Mr. Murphy, along with citing the many studies that show homeschool students often greatly outperform government students in nearly all categories of academic rigor. We've cited many of those studies on this program before. Then Brandon stated quite succinctly that more government control and less freedom for parents was not a conservative position. It definitely isn't a libertarian position. So Mr. Murphy's principles seem to be as rigid as a wet spaghetti noodle, just like most of the communists and their enablers in the media. And just like most liberals who are losing in the arena of facts and logic, the self-proclaimed libertarian told Brandon on the phone to, quote unquote, go home and beat your kids, followed by hanging up the phone. Now, most of this argument against the FREE Act came from a group called the Legislative Committee for the Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. They sent an email to the Education Subcommittee. An excerpt from that email insinuated that homeschool parents might abuse their children without any oversight from the government. Never mind the abuse of children in public schools by causing roughly 1/3 of them to not be proficient in math or English for the grade levels they are in. Ladies and gentlemen, that is abuse. And that is the government's abusing the children with plenty of government oversight. This, though, is another example of those instances of taxpayer-funded lobbyists working against the people. The citizens of this state pay the wages for those juvenile and family court judges, who then lobbied to have the General Assembly kill a bill that would benefit families and weaken government control. Isn't that just dandy, folks? This whole sordid affair around government controlled versus parental rights and education that that has been circling the sewer here in Tennessee this whole legislative session brings me back to something I discussed on this program quite a while ago. And it's this: you cannot have communism unless you have the kids. With Trans-Publican Bill Lee's school voucher scheme passed in a special session, rammed through, coupled with this complete aversion to parental rights in educating their children, along with the severe repercussions against a real conservative lawmaker in the General Assembly, all of that leads to that same conclusion. The government wants complete control of how children are educated, not only this state, but in the entire country. Despite the recent executive order by President Trump that sets the stage for abolishing the federal Department of Education, that is only the public-facing issue, folks. Many of the functions of the Department of Education are just being moved to other government entities, and the money moves along with them. The stage is still set for the federal government and the state government exercising their control over parents' children. Since homeschooling still has the least amount of government control, for now though, I urge every parent of every school-age child out there right now, pull your kids out of these institutions. You, and more importantly, your children, will be much better off for it. Government control over education is one of the reasons I also urge everyone to get involved in our system of self-governance. And that includes being involved in your local Republican Party organization, tying into today's title. Tomorrow, we are going to see if the Sevier County Republican Party and their efforts at gatekeeping will be successful and limit the number of people that will show up to vote for the new officers. Limit it to the usual suspects. It is weak county GOPs that leave us with weak Republican representatives in the General Assembly. And those trans-Republicans only give lip service to limited government and the liberty of the people. Look no further than recent bills passed or killed in our General Assembly. These trans-Republicans, these weak Republicans, and their leader, Governor Bill Lee, they talk a big game about supporting President Trump and his efforts to stop illegal immigration, and then they turn around and kill a bill that would transport illegal aliens in Tennessee to so-called sanctuary cities around the country. Or these weak Republicans, they kill a bill that would have forced parents in this country illegally to pay the state to have their children receive public education. They're quite content with forcing the taxpayers, the legal citizens of the state, to foot the many bills that contribute to the erosion of our liberty. Or they'll kill a bill that will require driving tests to be administered in English only. All hat and no cattle when it comes to deterring illegal immigrants from coming to Tennessee. Now, strong county Republican parties can do a better part in ensuring strong conservative Republicans are elected to serve in the General Assembly and to stop sending these weak trans-Republicans that do nothing other than to chip away at the people's liberty and sell our freedoms out to the highest corporate bidders or out-of-state lobbyists. With that, I'm going to pause right here before I come back with my closing thoughts, as well as this week's wisdom from God's Word. So stick around. I'll be right back. That'll wrap it up for this week, ladies and gentlemen. This is also a reminder for those Sevier County residents that vote Republican. Tomorrow is the biennial reorganization where the bona fide Republicans can vote into office new leadership in the county executive committee. There is at least one other declared candidate for the position of chairman other than the current incumbent, and we all know how awesome he is at following the bylaws and not cheating. Anyway, I also plan to be on the floor and nominate a few people for some of the positions on the executive committee. As we've discussed during this show, this event is taking place tomorrow at 11 a.m. on the third floor of the county courthouse. Please make plans to be there. One of the most dangerous phrases in the English language, and a very dangerous way of thinking, is this: that's the way we've always done it. We cannot allow the slow death by 1,000 cuts, by the stagnation and gatekeeping of the old guard, the good old boys, that they have allowed to happen to our Republican Party. Show up, vote, take control of your local parties, and send strong conservative Republicans to your general assemblies or your state legislative bodies. Now, this week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 19. Trusting in a treacherous man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. Treacherous man or treacherous group of people whose only consideration is in positions and titles and not advancing conservative principles will cause our Republican Party to slip, and for the communists and their alphabet mafia partners to get a stronger foothold in our great state. It is time to support people that will grow the Republican Party here in Sevier County. Show up and vote. That's all I can ask. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.